Let's rock and roll, Tony. Okay, good morning, friends. This is going to be an interesting episode because Professor Tootle always has a list of books or a cool treatise or a speech he references. No matter what topic you're talking about, he goes, that reminds me of a song. And so we decided to have an episode totally on like what a bibliography would be. What does it mean to be an American? What does it mean? What does America mean? And if you believe that kind of statement, instead of just having an opinion, have you read the book on? Did you see that speech? Is there, hey, there's an idea outlined by someone. And we decided to kind of list out a bunch of those verbally, and in the future, we'll kind of type them up and put them in associated with this video. So Professor Tootle, welcome. Thank you for doing an idea on books and movies and songs that we should all be aware of. Tell us about why, am I accurate? Is the big picture? Are there things that unify us? And if so, why don't you start and tell us about them?
Well, you want to know, I guess I've never had, I feel like I've spent my lifetime preparing for this this show today rather than, the 5 minutes before the show we normally do. But yeah, I think the way I took it, the way I took your prompt anyway, was that to spend some time thinking about the stuff that really touched me, but also seemed to explain America. And so I spent a little bit of time. I'm at home. I'm not at my office, so I just grabbed a bunch of books and music and poems, and and I just thought, okay, well, whatever John fires at me, I'm gonna be ready.
Love it. So let's start with a book or two or five that you think are really important. If you want to understand America, Americans, the thought behind it, give us some good books that we really should read at some point in our lives.
Fiction or nonfiction?
Actually, both. Love the question.
Well,
whatever you prefer.
Okay, well, let me start with, there's a twin set of books that I always start with. If you really want to understand the origins of America, one of my favorite historians who I fell in love with was a guy named Edmund Morgan. And there are two books of his. Probably the most important is American Slavery, American Freedom, because everybody has this question: where does slavery come from? Where does racism come from? And I just feel like people act like there's no answer to that question. Oh, if only we knew. Well, no, this book was published in 1974. It won every award you can win. It's still amazing. And then the other, and I like to contrast that with another book that he wrote called The Puritan Dilemma, which is this little slim book on, it's kind of a little mini biography of John Winthrop, a guy who wrote Model of Christian Charity, which is sometimes considered the kind of intellectual founding of the United States, that sermon that he gave on the ship Arabella right before they landed. And but if you really want to understand the kind of the mindset of, and I start with those because Massachusetts and Virginia were at the center of the Revolution. And if you want to understand why they rebelled, understand why people in New England rebelled and why people in Virginia rebelled, and then you will understand why they felt so strongly about this idea of freedom and how different it was in North and South. So because they just were using the same term but meaning completely different things by it. So I feel like you cannot understand America without starting with those two books by Edmund Morgan.
Wow, they're that authoritative. If there's something, it's not the Bible, it's read those two books.
Well, not just that, but they're also really well written. I mean, Edmund Morgan is such a good writer. I would say he had this other book called The Puritan Family that was so, I thought, I'm never going to care about this. This is so far afield from anything but he's such a good writer. I found myself going, oh, wow, the social structure of the Puritan family. I can't wait to see what happens next, which, he's that good of a writer. He made me care about subjects that I don't even like.
So do you want to stick with books, or do you want to talk about a treatise or two? Or is there some written speech or some authoritative document that one of the Federalist papers?
How about this? I'll go to the end. I'll say, all right, if we start with Edmund Morgan at the beginning and go to the end, there's a an essay written by Peter Schramm, who was the head. He's the one who really helped found and run. I don't know if he helped found, but he helped run the Ashbrook Center at Ashland University for years. He was a Hungarian immigrant, and he wrote this essay called "Born American, but in the Wrong Place." And if you just as a nice intimate bookend, if you want to know what happens when you found an ideological nation state, you can end up with somebody like a Peter Schramm coming along writing an essay saying, I was born American, but in the wrong place. And that's taken from something his father told him when they were immigrating from Hungary to the United States. And he asked, why do we have to leave? And he says, son, we were born Americans, just in the wrong place. Now we have to go to America, And you think about this in particular, the fact, and that's why it's so important that we have these kinds of conversations, because we are an ideological nation state. The only thing holding us together is a set of ideas. If we lose those, we lose everything. So, and it's just a great personal essay. It's kind of his story of how he came to the United States, but it really, and then when you think about Schramm, he passed away a few years ago, and and you would have loved him. He was a force of nature, larger than life, And he gathered together all these amazing people who were kind of like him. And that spirit is still at the Ashbrook Center and at the history department at Ashland. It's a great program with all these incredible people who kind of are all in the Schramm spirit. And the teachingamericanhistory.org is the website where a lot of these documents are available. That's hosted by Ashland. So good people, good program.
So, Professor, I have this vision that I think is accurate, that America is unique among all nations in the world when we were founded. What you're talking to is founded on an idea, not a family, not power. It was founded on an idea. Are there other key books that outline that philosophy? Are there other big picture items that we should be aware of that differentiate us from other countries?
Well, I would say just another nice, great short document is Federalist One, written by Alexander Hamilton, which is a statement. I mean, after all, you're arguing about the founding of the country, and this is a statement of American exceptionalism. Federalist One says, we're here to decide the important question. Now think about that. What is the important question in all of human history? About how human beings can live with each other. This is a statement of American exceptionalism, which is not to say that we're better than every place else, but it's to say exactly what you just mentioned, which is we are here to decide whether or not human beings can govern themselves by reflection and choice. Can we build a government based on the idea that we are going to, not desires of the people, right, but can we form a government that is based on reflection? We're going to think about this for a while, and then we're going to make a decision. All of modern psychology has been focused on trying to, figure out how the human brain works. And I feel like Alexander Hamilton already figured it out, which is we have the animal part of our brain and we have the human part of our brain. And Hamilton was saying we need to use, in modern language, we need to use the human part of our brain. The part that's capable of reflection and choice. And he says, the alternative is what every other form of government is. And that is just accident and violence, accident and force. That's what every other government on earth is. Who's the most violent and who is the son of someone else? And that's something reiterated also by Calvin Coolidge, who, I don't know, would probably be, to me, the next person to mention two essays of his and then a book of his that draw a lot of this together. I don't know.
Keep going. Tell us about.
So the two essays, one is a speech he gave on the anniversary of the 4th of July. And in that, he really makes a statement about both what America is, but it's also a very forceful statement about that should really draw together all conservatives. Where he's explaining the role of why we're conservatives. And he says, there are a lot of people who come along with ideas and they all claim that these are new ideas, that we need to abandon our old ideas because things have changed. And Coolidge says in this oration, that cannot be stated about this great charter. If anyone who wants to deny the equality of man, anyone who wants to deny the representative government, anyone who wants to deny that human beings should be free, all of they claim to be more modern, but they're all actually arguing for something that's more ancient than the ideas of the revolutionary fathers, that they just want to go back to when you were forced to do things by someone. And so he says no progress can be made beyond these propositions. But because we're flawed human beings, we want to keep working towards these things, knowing that we're going to fail. But you can't advance beyond the propositions of the founders, because the propositions of the founders will never be fulfilled. So anyway, his 4th of July. And then the other thing that I love is this other essay that's usually just called Business and the Free Press. And it really is a musing about the nature of truth in the modern world. And it's also a good example of how people can lie about a figure from the past by taking something out of context, because this is the one where it's literally about how easy it is to lie about people by taking things out of context. That's what the essay is about. And that's what people did to him in this essay. So it's almost, the irony is too rich, because people will often say about Calvin Coolidge, oh, he's the one who said the business of America is business. And it is true that, but what he meant by that is that, yes, of course, people are concerned with business aspects, because when we're engaged in business, we care about that sort of thing. But then he goes on to say how that's not the most important thing in life. And that's not what Americans are really about. And it's just funny that it's been taken out of context in order to somehow make the case against him that he thinks we should all just bow down and do whatever businessmen tell us to do, when it's really a speech about the exact opposite of that.
That is funny.
Yeah.
Now, did you say there were 3 references to him?
Yeah, and the other thing is his autobiography, which I almost read like it's a Bible or a work of poetry. I always keep a copy of it nearby, and I will just pick it up and start reading in the middle of it, and I always get something good out of it. So I'm a big fan of Coolidge's autobiography.
Excellent. Professor, we only have 15 minutes before we go to Q&A, so I'm hesitant to even ask this. But when we're trying to understand America, do we need to go back beyond previous to the founding of the country? Do we need to read the Magna Carta? Do we need to, I remember in political science in college, I read constitutional history of medieval England. Do we need to go back that far, or is it almost better to come more into modern era and understand how we've evolved?
I would say, there's a great little series. When I need to go back before American history, I reference a lot these very short introductions. It's a little series from Oxford. If there are any questions that people have and they don't want to read a long book, I highly recommend this series. It's just called A Very Short Introduction. I just pulled the first one off the shelf that I saw, but here's a very short introduction of the French Revolution, but they've got, 100 of these in this series. Great, cheap, you can buy it on Amazon for $5. Read it, 100 pages, and you'll get they pull the best scholars in the world to write the shortest books in the world on the subject. So
brilliant.
Highly
I'm
recommend.
glad I asked. Do you want to go to your next most influential? Oh, go ahead, keep going.
Oh, I was going to say the other thing that I think is fundamental is Victor Davis-Hanson's Western Way of War. It's also a very short book, but there is something very unique about the Western tradition, and I feel like this is also pretty fundamental. Yeah.
Okay. Now, forgive me for switching gears in this way, but is there something more non-intellectual? Is there a song or a poem, something that brings out the American spirit that isn't necessarily a nonfiction history book that we, before we get to Q&A, we still have 10 minutes, but before we get there, are some things we should bring out of the human spirit?
Well, I mean, I always say when, I mention all these other books, but if you ask me what my favorite book is, it's Cash by Johnny Cash. I feel like if you really want to understand America and the heart of the American spirit, read Johnny Cash's Cash by Johnny Cash. I mean, it is, along with Calvin Coolidge, my other favorite, and Grant's memoirs, probably my favorite autobiography / memoir. And of course, there are these great poets and intellectuals. One of my favorite intellectuals is a guy named James Weldon Johnson, and his book, The Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man. But then there's something else from James Weldon Johnson I wanted to get to today, but that hit me so hard as a young man, because there was an essay of his that I read, and it had his personal credo in it. And I read it, and it became my personal credo. Now, I recognize that he's writing in an essay called Negro Americans, What Now? But the great thing about reading intellectual history is, and I'll say, let me also plug this other book called The Degradation of American History by David Harlan. He's the one who said, you can do this to history books if you want. So when I read this little credo, he said that from this essay, the pledge to myself, which I have endeavored to keep through the greater part of my life, is I will not allow one prejudiced person or 1 million or 100 million to blight my life. I will not let prejudice or any of its attendant humiliations and injustices bear me down to spiritual defeat. My inner life is mine, and I shall defend and maintain its integrity against all the powers of hell.
Wow.
This claim that my inner life is mine, and I shall defend and maintain its integrity against all the powers of hell. And to me, that resonated because of, this band Fugazi, which was a punk band I listened to, and Minor Threat. But I grew up listening to Fugazi tell me, you are not what you own. We owe you nothing. You have no control. This emphasis, and that was, as part of a musician and part of an independent music scene. And just the idea that freedom means you get to do what you want. You maintain control over your own intellectual life. Another work of poetry, if you can indulge me, is
Please.
Actual Heir by David Berman, probably my favorite poet, and this is my favorite poetry book. And he also was in a band called the Silver Jews with Steve Malkmus from Pavement, if any of you are familiar with the band Pavement. But his poetry works were pretty serious and pretty wonderful. And I've already read something, so maybe I won't read from this unless we have time later. But I will say that this is another one of these books that you can just, it will enrich your life if you start dipping into it.
Well, keep that handy, because I think we'll finish before we go to Q&A. You can read the portion of the poem that you think is valuable for us.
Yeah.
So, Professor, am I wrong? I am somewhat frustrated at dear friends, and by the way, I'm ignorant on many things as well. But I kind of wish every friend would read Plato's Republic to understand America. And the reason for it is because there's been some really smart people through the centuries that have understood how human brains work and how society works and how to stop power and how to check other power. To understand America, one of my 10 would be Plato's Republic. And you'd say, no, John, you don't need to go that far. Well, here's another book that's important.
Well, I just think that, I'm lazy, and I also am a teacher, so I know what students find boring. So if I give them Plato's Republic, I think we should read it, and I think you should read Plutarch's Lives and all that. But I just also am used to trying to fit, I teach World War II in 3 hours. So, so here's something else I would say. Actually, and my favorite political philosopher, and this is like almost conservative heresy because he's known as a liberal, but was introduced to me by a guy named Jeffrey Herf, who teaches at the University of Maryland. And I told him I wasn't able to sleep at night until I read Isaiah Berlin. And once I found Isaiah Berlin, I read every essay I could get my hand on. But if you're going to read just one, there's this slim little volume that was published right after he died called First and Last. And it has within it the last essay he wrote before he died. And that one last essay kind of summarizes pluralism, the philosophical system that undergirds America is pluralism. And it's a defense of pluralism that he gave right before he died. I mean, and it also contains the first essay he wrote when he was a child, which is sort of interesting for because wow, this kid was smart when he was a kid. But the essay in it is just a wonderful summary. But I would say, obviously you can spend your entire life reading. And there's a great volume that was put together. He's lucky he has a fantastic editor named Henry Hardy. And there's a great giant book called The Proper Study of Mankind of his, that has most of his important essays in it. I also really like The Crooked Timber of Humanity. I mean, that was also really important to me because I had never quite heard he got that phrase from Kant, where out of the crooked timber of humanity, nothing straight has ever been wrought. And if you just think about it, well, you just know that socialism will never work, right? And and I loved it because of the metaphor he used to describe truth, that we're all kind of like fish swimming in the Mississippi River. We experience truth like a fish experiences the current. At any given moment, we never know which way. If we're pointed towards New Orleans, we might be in a turn in the river. We might be getting it. But we know that there's a current, and we know that eventually this river ends in New Orleans. But we feel it like it's a current. I just love that metaphor of how imperfectly human beings encounter the truth.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
We only have 4 minutes left, Professor.
Oh, no.
So I know we'll get some more in Q&A, so no worries. But are there some modern essayists, modern books that are important? One that comes to mind that wouldn't make your list probably, but it's where we met. Love Your Enemies by Arthur Brooks, or a lot of Republicans think that Ayn Rand's book, Atlas Shrugged, is the seminal book on modern philosophy. Or what are the books that you think we must know about?
Well, I would say Arthur Brooks' other book, The Conservative Heart. Love Your Enemies, I feel like hard because it's really puts out human flourishing like him, except for maybe the podcast Econ Talk. That's another, if we want to start talking about podcasts, like Russ Roberts on Econ Talk is kind of the working same vein. I feel like if you listen to Russ Roberts on Econ Talk and Arthur Brooks, you can stay pretty up to date on the latest, best information on human flourishing. I have more novels. I got more books. I don't know what people are interested in. You mentioned historians being boring. Let me just plug a couple of historians who aren't boring. Tony Williams, Hamilton, and Tom Brasino, Nation Forged in War. I will tell you that everybody who reads Nation Forged in War loves it. I mean, it's kind of like Band of Brothers, but it's also really important because it's an ethnic history. It's how World War II taught Americans to get along. I don't know. Ralph Ellison, Invisible Man. Everybody should read that. Everyone should read everything that Marilyn Robinson writes because she's a genius. She's Melville right now. Read this, George Nash, Conservative Intellectual Movement. This is the founding book of the conservative intellectual movement. And I will say, I've been so blessed that George Nash is a friend of mine. And if you have a chance to become his friend, you will be gratified beyond all belief. He is one of the kindest, most gentle, most decent, finest human beings I've ever known. And I just, I mean this sincerely. I love George Nash, both as a scholar and as a human, but more as a human being. You know, as great of a mind as he is, he's an even better human being. So World War II, everybody loves World War II. Two favorite: Army at Dawn, Vic Atkinson. And then if you really want to understand the Depression in World War II, this big giant book, Freedom from Fear. Stuff that people care about, like slavery and the Constitution. I've always mentioned James Oakes' Freedom National, and then people always want to know what this means. Like, No Property in Man, Sean Wilentz. People, the frustrating thing for me is that people seem to hate. There's this anti-American. Here's a document for you: the Cornerstone speech. There is an unholy alliance that of people who want America to be a racist country, actual racists and people who hate America. And they want to make this case that America is and has always been a racist country. And it's just funny to me that they're both making the same arguments, and one side claims to hate racism and the other side loves it. But there have always been people who were trying to make the case that America is and it was founded as a racist country and it will always be one. And if you want to read a racist arguing about how great racism is, then read the Cornerstone speech. Because I don't know why, but people will sometimes argue that that the Civil War wasn't about slavery, and then here's a speech where they say, no, it's all about slavery and racism. The cornerstone of the Confederacy is going to be, we're going to found a country on the truth that racism is true. And they say it, so I don't know why this is even debated. And then the other thing I thought was interesting, I don't know how interesting it would actually be. Oh, here's another plug. Another thing I do that makes my life better is I have this giant Oxford book of American poetry. I leave this on my breakfast table and I just read a poem out of it when I feel like it in the morning when I drink coffee.
I love that idea. I do the same thing with quote books. I have a variety of quote books and I just like reading great quotes throughout the history of the world.
The other thing I did was right before I went to my bedside table to show you what the books I am currently working on reading. So this is my bedside table. These are the books that I have not yet finished. James Oakes, Crooked Path to Abolition. Heather Cox Richardson, To Make Men Free, History of the Republican Party. Thaddeus Stevens, Civil War Revolutionary Fighter for Justice, novel for my book club. I guess you probably don't, I haven't even started it. Sean McGuire, Middle Game. I don't even know if it's good. This one I just got, Until Justice Be Done, America's First Civil Rights Movement from the Revolution to Reconstruction. Oh, this one, oh my gosh. Illiberal Reformers. It's about the eugenics movement. Last Brahmin. I'm actually loving this. I can't wait to get back to it. It's about Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. and the making of the Cold War. Question of Freedom, which is about the families who challenged slavery from the nation's founding to the Civil War. And then Rick Brookhiser's little book, which is actually amazing, called Give Me Liberty. And it's just a history of America's exceptional ideal. So those are the books that I have not yet finished, but they're on my bedside table. We didn't even talk about music, though.
Yeah, so Professor, I'm not shocked that you have already given us 100 or so books to reflect on. Before we go to Q&A, team will be doing that in just a minute or two. Are there a couple movies, or is there a song or two? Was there a lecture that you've heard and videoed? Have you seen a politician or a poet that it summarizes, besides books? Are there some things that we should make sure we look at all the different mediums out there? And then we'll go to Q&A.
Well, I love podcasts, so I do listen to quite a few podcasts. And I've already plugged in almost every meeting we've had, the Dispatch. The Dispatch, in addition to having its news section, they put out newsletters, and their newsletters are fantastic. The one on capitalism, there's one, capital O-L-ism. the stuff on elections, and then the stuff on the Supreme Court is amazing. And in addition to that, they also have podcasts. I love Advisory Opinions, which is just on Supreme Court decisions and following the Supreme Court. The David French and Sarah Isgard are amazing. So I would just plug the entire Dispatch family. I like the Editors podcast a lot, which on National Review, and Mad Dogs and Englishmen is another one I love, which is Kevin Williamson and I'm just blanking on his name, the English guy.
We'll type it up later.
I have no idea why I'm blanking on his name. But Mad Dogs and Englishmen, and I already plugged Econ Talk is fantastic. I have a podcast that I do with a local paper called The Paper Trail, if you want to listen to more of me every week. What others? Oh, songs. I mean, I mentioned this before, but the Avett Brothers is one of my favorite artists now. And their song No Hard Feelings really sums up a lot of my personal feelings towards a lot of things. But another artist who's fantastic is a guy named Charlie Crockett, who is really doing traditional country in a way that sounds amazing. I'm a big fan of Charlie Crockett. And Leon Bridges would be another if you're interested in a kind of newer soul music, especially Leon Bridges' first album. Pretty incredible.
Okay, Professor, you'll probably have a chance to add some more in during the Q&A that will start right after your poem that you wanted to refer to.
Oh, do you want to hear like a little bit of actual air? Okay, let me. Now, this isn't the whole thing, but I'll just read the last two stanzas, and then I like it because it's about conversations and what's important in life. We'd had hot and cold conversations in dead languages for years, yet the installation and plugging in of moons, the slight changes in the rules of tennis, the thought that we could be losing never completely crossed our minds. Perhaps it took the marriage of now and then, here in the weeks leading up to football season, to make us realize that in death we are declassified, whether it arrives in European forests that smell like attics or while negotiating a curve by the college library. These words are meant to mark this day on earth.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, team. This is your chance to ask the professor anything you want to know about America, about Americans, what's important. It can be in any genre. It can be in any, if you want to make a stab at your own book or favorite movie, we're, unless you give a big, long speech, we're delighted to hear your recommendations as well. So what are your questions first, Professor Tootle? And we realize a couple of you signed in late, and that's, we have a doctor's appointment. We had to move it up a half an hour this week. We apologize. Nick, Jody, Frank, Peter, talk to us. Frank, are you trying, or you have too much to ask? Nick, I see that you've taken yourself off. Yeah, what's your question?
Thank you for the list. I was frantically taking some notes here, and I appreciate the recommendations. I'm going to check several of these out, so thank you. You mentioned something earlier about the two groups of folks who would love to make America into a racist nation. Could you speak a little more about that? Because I find that fascinating, and I actually have somewhat related to John's Facebook post yesterday about perceptions. And I've actually selected a pop culture type tagline for the folks who are now in charge in DC. And I'd like to get your impression on those two classifications of folks, and then maybe I'll throw out my suggested tagline for the folks that are in charge in Washington D.C.
Unless it's mean-spirited, Nick. Don't do it if it's mean-spirited. Okay, cool.
I promise it's not.
Professor. Well,
I would just say that, you know, the people who the challenges to the United States have always come from the left and the right, the monarchists and the socialists, which both seek to undermine our pluralistic system And again, I would refer back to Isaiah Berlin. Anyone who is a monist, anyone who believes that there is a single causal thing or idea that should reconcile every part of American society. And actually, if you want to read more, Karl Popper is another good philosopher in this regard. So it's anyone who says, I know what the answer is, and the answer is racism or abolishing property rights, or anybody who has a monistic explanation for how we should organize society. And in regards to the Civil War, one of the groups of people who began arguing that they had the solution for America's problems, and their solution was racism. That racism could solve the internal contradictions of what they were starting to call capitalism in the middle of the 19th century. Another document that really explains this is Cannibals All. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Sociology of the South. And in it, what they're really doing is they're taking the new ideas of European socialism, and saying that socialists have identified what the problem with America is, and racism is going to solve those problems. In other words, freedom, that was okay, but we're past that. And socialists have identified what the problems with America, what the problems of America are. But what's going to solve this problem is racism, because then it will solve the problem that the socialists have pointed out. And so because of that, we have, as I said, this unholy alliance between people who don't like freedom because pluralism is hard and it has to be retaught with every generation when you're an ideological nation state, and seek a single solution for that problem. And so it's socialists and racists who both want freedom to not work. If I'm just being blunt and summarizing it, it's socialists and racists.
Thanks for the question, Nick. Make your brief pitch.
Yeah, so I tend to agree with you. And, I've seen folks who I think have ill will towards America. So in your second category, the non-racists. And then recently I've seen it from really good, well-meaning folks that I would put John in the classification of, kind of steering towards this other direction. And I don't remember if anybody remembers a comedian from about 20 years ago. I can't remember the comedian's name, but I remember his show. And it was, I love you, you're perfect, now change. And I feel like the folks in Washington, D.C. are trying to give a duplicitous message that we love America and we love everything that it stands for. But then on the other side, they're saying, and we need to fundamentally change our country because we're a racist nation. And I really struggle with that. And so when you mentioned the two classifications of folks that you saw calling America racist, that really resonated with me. And I'd put that out for others to talk about, and I'd love to hear John's thoughts on it. But
for the record, I move to strike my name associated with both of those two groups. Professor, defend my good honor.
Well, I would just say to remember what James Weldon Johnson said, which is, you don't have to be defined by your enemies. You should defend and maintain your inner life is yours, and defend and maintain its integrity against all the powers of hell. That just because people are making incorrect arguments around the country, that doesn't mean that you need to make the opposite argument. You keep making your own argument for freedom and for the founding and for pluralism. Go back to what, now I'm referencing what we already talked about, what Calvin Coolidge said. Anyone who tries to make some sort of argument that there's some kind of progress that you can make beyond pluralism is not arguing for progress. They're arguing for some old ancient idea that really comes down to power and force and coercion. I mean, that's why I try not to use the word capitalism when I talk, because it wasn't present at the time of the founding. I just use peace. Why don't we just talk about peace instead of capitalism? You know, capitalism is the word that socialists gave to what we would call peace. The idea that I'm not going to force you to give me your things. I call that peace. You know, like the idea, when they use the term capitalism, in a way you're accepting their logic that somehow you believe in this false thing called property rights. No, property rights aren't false, right? I earned this, it's mine. Someone peacefully gave it to me in exchange for my labor. And now you want to come and take it and you want to use force to do so. Well, that's violence. What you want to do to me is violence, and what I want is peace. So I reject the premise of the question that says that that I believe in this false thing called property rights. So again, maintaining your internal integrity and not letting the people who oppose you define you. You know, that's the greatest legacy, and that's why I say that I think that Black intellectuals in America have been so undervalued, because they're the ones who have been consistently making this argument. You know, in a previous episode, we talked about the great contributions of African Americans, and I said, you know, Black Americans have saved America so many times because they're the ones who keep reminding us of this. You know, and you know, I picked James Weldon Johnson because I feel like people don't know enough about him, but I could have easily have picked Martin Luther King or Ralph Ellison or Frederick Douglass or any number of Black intellectuals to make the same point, because they're all making the same point, which is I want to define myself. And it does, and just because you want to say that I believe in this false thing called property, I don't. I believe that when I work for something and someone gives it to me, that it's mine and you don't get to take it from me using force. I call that peace.
Jody, did you have a question next? No urgency if you don't.
Yeah,
Yes?
I kind of do. I mean, in my brain, I feel like I would love to see a history of racism book, not just America, but all of it, because we've made so much progress, even in my lifetime. The difference between what racism looked like then and what it looks like now. And I never want to deny that racism exists, but it's so interesting to me. I feel like they are really pushing it now because they feel like they're losing it. Because we have made so much progress. And I don't know if that's just my Pollyanna version of life or not. And I also think racism has morphed a lot in what we define as racism. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Like, if the greatest disappointment in my life is the resurgence of racism, and it really felt like 20 or 30 years ago that racism was on its way out, and now it comes at us in a different way. People use this term identity politics, but what they really mean is that the amount of pigment in your skin tone is what gets to define you, and it's the opposite of what the goal was supposed to be. In terms of there being a history of racism, I think, oh gosh, and now the title of this book has escaped me, but I think so many of just even the term race, like I use it as a term of convenience, but another thing we've said before in previous episodes is that we should always remind ourselves that race was a concept invented by racists in order to justify racism. The very idea that human beings should be classified by something called race is something that racists invented. We don't need a new doctrine to tell us that we're all common children of a common God. There are certainly, religions that have argued that in the past. My own religion, I'm a Christian, just says that we're all just sinners, equal in the sight of God. So we certainly don't need it's not a tough philosophical argument to make from that regard. But if you want, I wish I could remember the name of it, but there was a great book that I read last year on where we get these sort of on the tree of evolution, and how this metaphor that was used in the 19th century to describe human evolution, how much damage it did. But in the midst of all of this book, it's really about, scientists learning about evolution. Again, science becoming politicized, and then instead of moving on once it's proven wrong, you have these people who argue long after the discovery of DNA that there's this thing called race, and that it somehow has a biological element to it, rather than it just being a set of biological traits that are no different than whether or not you can make a taco tongue or not. That's how important your skin color is. And now it's great because on the video I'm seeing all of you try and do it. But these are single biological traits that are no more significant. So, but racists want that to be true, and people who want to make America a racist country want it to be true. And now it's an argument that goes under the name identity politics, that you are defined by the group that you belong to, and whoever is the most aggrieved group gets to win the argument that day, based on whatever the most recent public tragedy is. And I would just simply say James Weldon Johnson already told us what we should believe about that, which is, I'm going to be in charge of my own internal mind. The comedian Adam Carolla said it once this way, where he said, I know I'm not a racist because I asked myself. Like, how do I know I'm not a racist? I don't know. I asked myself, are you a racist? And the deeper conversation we got to a couple of weeks ago was about being considerate and being kind to each other. Now that's a different conversation, and calling people by what they would like, identifying people how they want to be identified. That's kindness, that's consideration, all of that. But in terms of what I believe, you need to be in charge of your own beliefs. At least that's what I think.
Cool. Frank, you're up next.
Thank you. So it seems an awful lot of what we discussed today has to do with what is deemed a human right. And I have heard, and I wonder if you, Professor Tootle, if you have some thoughts about how a fundamental definition of what can be a human right. And I've heard some variation of a human right can only exist if it doesn't require like a contribution or a take from others for it to exist. And so I would like to imagine something I might read to better understand that concept, if you believe it. And you're thinking about what I might read. Maybe just your definition of that.
Again, there's an Isaiah Berlin essay called Two Concepts of Liberty, and that explores the idea of positive and negative liberty. I've already mentioned Isaiah Berlin. This is another essay of his called Two Concepts of Liberty. And you just take that essay and then put that into the American system of government with this understanding, that the Constitution is a negative liberty document, that it is a freedom document, what cannot be done to you, right? And then positive liberty is something that is supposed to be taking place at the level of government that is closest to you, where you as your neighbors might decide we need new streets, and we're going to take a vote on this street whether or not we're going to pay for the repaving of the street. And that vote might be 10-1, but that's something that is actually involves a taking. That's positive liberty. That's something that is being done to you. But when positive liberty needs to happen, the idea of a conservative is that it should happen as close to you as possible, so that it makes the most sense. But just kind of taking that two concepts of liberty argument and then understanding that the that the federal Constitution is a negative liberty document, and your state and local, county and city and neighborhood government, that's where positive liberty is supposed to take place.
Thank you.
Peter, you're up.
Got it. Thank you. Can you hear me? Now, when I was looking at John's question on Facebook about understanding Americans, I thought about how could you help someone recognize an American? And I kind of went through, being an arts guy, I went through the movies. I thought about Godfather. I thought about Do the Right Thing. And I landed on The Right Stuff. And I think if you think about America, the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs are just about one of the most obvious ways to recognize the striving, the industriousness that comes with being an American. I'd love to get your take on how do you recognize what it means to be an American?
Well, I think there is first a stubbornness, a spirit, a joy, a recognition of the rights of others, a recognition of complexity. One of the reasons that this was so fun to prepare for is as I started to gather up these books and songs and poems, I just thought, what a rich life we live. Look what freedom allows us to do. Look what peace allows us to do. It allows people to let their freak flags fly so that we're getting the best of everyone. When you think about what freedom really allows us to do, it allows every single person. And this is something, these are two other speeches, actually, two other letters that I'll mention. Theodore Roosevelt corresponded with socialists, which is great. And he wrote letters to Lincoln Steffens and Upton Sinclair. And in both of them, he kind of makes fun of socialists and calls their pathetic beliefs, and then in his New Nationalism speech, something else we didn't mention, but he says what true equality of opportunity means is that we get to make all of what within us, society gets the benefit of our best. And what Americans really believe in is we want to live our lives unencumbered by the special privileges of others. And that's a constant struggle because, we live in a society where everybody's trying to, gain some advantage. So it's not enough to simply say, we need to be left alone, because there are going to be forces in society that try to use special privilege in order to gain something that they ought not have. And that's not anti-capitalism, it's not anti-freedom, but it's something that has to be negotiated in the messy political process. And again, it's even better when it's negotiated in the process that's closest common sense to it when we're making those decisions. Spirit of Beach Boys album, Pet Sounds. And I think that's this, this is someone who is expressing the best of what is in him. And the people who made that record, you think about just, this is going to be a random reference, but the bass player, Carol Kay, this woman who is a shredding bass player who was there for all these Pet Sounds sessions, or the drummer, Hal Blaine, getting the benefit of these incredible artists who come together with this incredible composer, with the best sound engineers. In a way, getting back to our conversation, that's what you think about what a movie is, the artists and the craftsmen that go into the creation of this incredible piece of art John Williams as a composer, or one of the best single songs that I've heard recently came from this movie called Shutter Island. It was very, but the soundtrack was done by the guy who was the main songwriter in the band. And he took a piece of classical music and combined it with the song Strange Fruit in order to create this incredible new song for this movie. And you just think, this is amazing. We're all so privileged that we get to live at a time where we can experience this piece of art, and I just think that, any of these things qualify as an expression of what makes America great. It brings a tear to your eye. And same with, riding your motorcycle up into the foothills, or, there are all these wonderful things that peace and freedom allow us to do.
So I don't know how we ended with Easy Rider, as being one of the historic parts of our country. But I do think, friends, that you've seen the depth and breadth of knowledge of Professor Tootle. It's just, I kind of feel like I'm an elementary school student chatting with, even though I have a political science degree and a law degree, Professor. You just have so much at the tip of your tongue. So we're about out of time, but I'll give one opportunity for somebody to jump in if they really want to ask a key question that they think would be important to the conversation. Quickly, anyone else? Okay, thank you for being with us today. The professor and I have outlined another 30 or so common lectures, and a lot of it is on history of. Some of it is contemporary. So we might do a history of weapons in the United States, or history of immigration, or voting rights. They may be contemporary topics that are controversial, but most important is that we want to have topics that have people understand our society better, so we can make better arguments, so we can argue better, and we can take some of the irrational or extreme, not that views may not be substantive and passionate, but in the way we determine that we're all have a common bond together. So, Professor, I'd like you to hint on future topics, or your kind of a view of what we've done so far and where we're going, so we can see if we can gain more folks into the conversation.
Well, I would just say my favorite part has become the Q&A. I'm already starting to really appreciate the contributions from the now what I consider the panel. So I really hope that we can continue to add really quality people into this conversation, because now I feel like I'm learning from you guys. And so I just want to say thank you to all of you, because I feel like I have a conversation with all of these people, all these books, but it's really wonderful to have a conversation with you as well. So you're already making my life richer and better. So thank you.
You're so kind. So folks that want to join us, we are on 11 to noon Mountain Time every Friday, unless we have a doctor's appointment, we decide to go on vacation, or if one of us gets sick. So hope to see you next Friday at 11 o'clock. Thank you so much for being here, everyone.